Hi, thanks for joining me for this episode of Talk on Hormones. I'm calling it the nitty gritty on hormones. And I want to dive right in and I want to talk about why you would test your hormones, how you would test your hormones, should you do it, and what kinds of testing are available. So this topic was born out of probably 100 different conversations with women about their hormones because they call me and they say, "Can you help with X, Y, and Z hormone problem?" And they'll tell me these stories about how they went to their doctor and their doctor said to them, "Well, unless you've missed a year's worth of periods, 12 periods in a row, we don't really need to test your hormones." Or, "You've had a hysterectomy, we're not going to test your hormones." And to me, that's crazy. Like, women are asking for solutions. Or another favorite answer of mine is, "Well, we don't need to test your hormones. We'll just put you on some on the birth control pill. So if you have a cycle that um, isn't regular or is painful or whatever it's not doing properly, instead of actually doing the homework of figuring out what is going on and how to get your body to do what it's supposed to do, we're just going to throw you on some synthetic form of hormones. We'll take away your normal cycle, we'll give you a fake cycle, and then all of your problems will be solved." Except that they're not. All of the underlying foundational imbalances with your hormones are still there, even if you're masking them with something like the birth control pill. And in quite frankly, in a lot of cases, women's problems stem from they have a functional excess of estrogen, whether it's really that they have too much or they have too much of estrogen unopposed by progesterone. And if you missed last week's topic and you want to listen more about progesterone, I broke all that down on progesterone. But progesterone is a balance to estrogen. So if we don't figure out what's going on, how do we help? And then if we come along and we slap some birth control pills on it or whatever, we end up actually making it worse because that's just synthetic estrogen. And if you're already in a state where your body is feeling like it has too much estrogen, then we just come and add estrogen. That doesn't that never made sense to me. Now, it is effective in terms of, does it make your cycle not as heavy or whatever? Yes, it does. But does it ever get to the root of the problem and help you be healthier? No, not really. So if you are frustrated and you're thinking, okay, why would I want to test my hormones? Let's dive in and talk about that. Some really good reasons to know what's going on with your hormones would be things like you have heavy or painful menstrual cycles. So you're bleeding heavily, and and the definition of that is if you're soaking through a pad or a tampon in an hour, 2 hours, that's heavy bleeding. So a lot of people don't know that because it's normal for them. They've had that their whole life. That's not normal. That's heavy bleeding. Maybe you have a lot of cramps, or you're extremely moody or irritable, or you get headaches, or your menstrual cycle is something that it crosses the line from being a little inconvenient, because let's face it, if we're women, it can be inconvenient and we don't love having it all the time. It's natural and normal. But if it crosses that line from being a slight inconvenience to being like, I have to take the day off work, or I have to lay in bed, or I can't go to class, or this is interfering with my ability to parent my kids because I'm snapping their heads off. That is a dysfunctional menstrual cycle. And I feel like you should analyze that. Fertility issues. You're trying to conceive a child and you don't, or you have repeated miscarriages. And this always breaks my heart when the medical world says, "Well, wait till you have three in a row, and then we'll do something. We'll talk about it." 3 in a row, good grief! If you've ever had one of those, they're awful. I've had two myself, and they are some of the saddest, most horrible things to go through. And so, I don't need you to wait till you have three of those to come ask for my help with hormones. I don't understand that. Or when you start transitioning into the menopausal space. So sometime in the 40s and is you'll hit like perimenopause, And then around 50, you'll actually start going through menopause. For most people, that's the natural order of how that works. But maybe you're having hot flashes, maybe you're vaginal dryness. There's a lot of different things menopausally that you can want help with, and just the weight gain, the lack of libido, all of that stuff. And then having had a hysterectomy. A lot of my patients have had a hysterectomy, and so they were thrown into menopause. And whether they left the ovaries or they didn't, it's still a pretty brutal transition into menopause. And there are some considerations for that. I think it also helps to look at hormones when you're trying to assess what kind of risk you're at for future estrogen sensitive cancers, things like breast cancer, uterine, ovarian, things like that. You can actually, using certain types of hormone testing, that gives you a little more clarity on how you're breaking down and metabolizing and excreting hormone. And so the way that you do that gives you a risk profile, like, hey, you're doing this in a way that is a little more closely associated with the elevated risk of estrogen sensitive cancers, or you're doing it in a way that looks really good and healthy. So you can kind of look at your risk profile. And when we get to the types of testing, I will share some of that with you. Okay, so that's the why you would want to test and when you would want to test. I always tell women too, if you come to me and you have a question about your hormones, I will run whatever test you ask me to run. I will give you an opinion if I think one is better suited, and of course I will tell you my opinion. But if you just come to me and you're like, I just want to know what my hormones are doing, will you run the Dutch test on me? It's the most comprehensive hormone test. I just want to know, you know, how am I breaking down and clearing hormones? You bet I will. I'll run it on you. We'll go through it. We'll see, is everything good, or are there some indicators that, hey, maybe there's some red flags that for the future that you need to look at now and be proactive about your health. I love when people are proactive about their health. The truth is, most people respond to pain and negative stimulus, so they have a problem, which is why they seek medical care. But 10 to 20% of people are more proactive, and they just want to get all the good information before and identify problems before they become really big life changing medical events. And I love that. And so if you're in that category, hats off to you. I love it. Okay, but let's talk about, there's 3 ways to test hormones. You can look at hormones in blood, saliva, and urine. So I think of these as kind of good, better, and best, really. Um, but a better way to think about that is there's strengths and weaknesses to each type of test. Blood testing has been for a long time the sort of gold standard for hormone testing. It's how it's always been done. It's a lot of the research has been done with that. Now that's changing, but historically that's been true. So it's kind of always been around. It's considered gold standard. So for that reason, we're always probably going to have serum or blood hormone testing, and it's easy to get it, especially like I'm usually running other blood labs on somebody, so it's super easy to just add the hormone levels there and do it. It's the least expensive way. And some of the hormones are actually really reliable in blood. Things like DHEA and progesterone, they're really, looking at them in blood is a great way to do that. The estrogens, it tends to be a little more dialed in and specific when you look either at saliva or urine. So the estrogen I prefer on something other than blood, if someone's really concerned about that part of the picture. But I always tell people, if we're just like trying to decide on a high level whether hormones are behaving themselves and doing basically what they're supposed to do, blood work is sufficient for that. And we can look at where you are at in your cycle when you have your blood work done, and then look at what your ranges are at that time. Now, one of the disadvantages of blood work for hormones is that the hormone in the blood is bound to a carrier protein. So what you have is you have all of the hormone that exists in blood bound to a protein. When it's bound to the protein, it is not free and usable. So from a functional standpoint, there's some limitations to that. We know grossly how much hormone we have, but we don't know how much is free and available at the tissue level to do what that hormone does. So, meaning that we get a ballpark idea of what the hormones are doing, but it's not a deep dive. So, in some people, is that appropriate and good enough, and we can get the information we need? You bet it is. But then we move on to the next type of testing, and that is saliva testing. I've done this for years and years, and it used to be considered sort of the gold standard of how to test hormones. And it's considered that because it measures free levels of hormone. So now you're talking about what level of hormone is free and available to do the job it does at the tissue level. So you're not talking about only what's bound to blood. So that does help us, because now we get a little more, because hormones are functional, right? We don't care if they're inactive and bound to blood. They're not, it's not the same as being free and available to be utilized to do whatever estrogen and progesterone do. So that's why I like saliva testing. Now also, when you do a blood test, you get a one-time snapshot at, say 10 o'clock in the morning. When someone gets their blood test done, their hormones are done. But hormones fluctuate wildly throughout the day. So you only get one snapshot with blood, where it's saliva, they track you throughout the day. There's 4 test points throughout the day. So we catch fluctuations that we don't catch on blood. We also, the saliva hormone panel that I like also has a stress index. So we're taking 4 stress hormone snapshots a day too, so we can map out your stress response and see that, because we all know that stress is a huge player in when hormones misbehave. Sometimes we can point the finger at stress as the culprit. So that's kind of in a nutshell the saliva issue. Then fast forward to the third type of testing, which is Dutch testing, and it's a urinary metabolites testing, and it was born out of sort of the best way, the most comprehensive way to look at your hormones is collecting your urine over a 24-hour period. And so you used to have to carry this little gas can around, and you would urinate in it, and you'd keep all that urine for 24 hours. And and then they would take that and break it down and analyze. So you would have that vision of over 24 hours what your hormones were doing. But as you can imagine, nobody loved carrying that little gas can around to catch their urine for 24 hours. So Dutch came up with a way to get the same results as that, the comprehensive nature of that type of testing. And they only have you do urine 4 collection times throughout the day. So they have found that the results are about the same. But what you need to know about that is it's the most comprehensive way to look at hormones, because now we can see not only how much is free, the hormones that are free, we can see how they're being broken down and metabolized by your body, because we have urinary metabolites. So this is where it's really helpful if you are thinking, gosh, my mom had breast cancer, my sister had breast cancer, my aunt had breast cancer, my grandma had it, and you want to be as proactive as you can about mitigating that risk as much as you can control. You can see, are you breaking these estrogens down in a way that is less or more favorable to having issues later. And so that's one of the big things I like with that. We can also see how if your liver is able to clear those, because sometimes people have backed up levels of hormones because their liver, it's a liver clearance issue. So both your liver and your gallbladder play a role in helping. Hormones are like waxy and fatty. They're a cholesterol based substance, so they have to be broken down, and you need good bile, that's the gallbladder, and then you need to be able to conjugate them and methylate them and clear them out of your liver. And you can use this Dutch test to see whether all of that is happening. So it's kind of like next level. It's even more comprehensive than the saliva. And really the only time that I will now use saliva is when cost is an issue. I feel like the Dutch is, I get more information from that. And if someone really wants the most comprehensive look, I think that's the right answer. But we live in a world where some people are like, I would love that level of the comprehensive nature of that, but I need to back down to the saliva for financial reasons, because it costs a little bit less to do it that way. So that's kind of one of the things that when I speak with someone and I ask them questions about their hormones and what's bothering them, I will listen to what they're saying, and I will help them connect to the right type of test that meets their financial needs, their health needs, and just so we can step through this and say, okay, I think we can get the job done just by looking at this on blood, or no, I think what you're telling me, I think a Dutch test would be appropriate because we want that clarity with the urinary metabolites. So anyway, that's just a couple of quick differences between what blood testing looks like, saliva testing, and Dutch testing. If you have a question that you want to put in the chat, you can go ahead and do it. We posted a link to the blog article I wrote. It has that little chart that has just a quick reference on the 3 types of hormone testing: blood, saliva, and urine, and when you might want all of those things, or one over the other. You can look at that. And then just a quick note on this is, most people want to test their hormones because they want to fix something. And so then the next question I always get is, well, so what if my hormones are out of balance? Then we take good data and we look at them and we say, what are the underlying reasons? Why are these hormones misbehaving? And we do that. And then we come and we use the most natural means we can to get those things doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if maybe you've had a hysterectomy and you're not going to encourage your ovaries to make anything else because you don't have any left. So maybe that conversation looks a little different for you than it does for someone that still has functioning ovaries. But I think starting with really good testing helps us dial in what's going on, so that we don't just slap a symptomatic fix on hormones. We are actually understanding why they aren't doing what they're supposed to do in the first place. And then also, I posted in the chat, if you're watching this and you're like, you know what, I want to know more about this. I want you to listen to me and help me figure out what kind of testing I need and what does that look like. I call that a discovery call, where I just call you and we talk through all that kind of stuff. So that there's a link in the comments to that. So thanks for joining me for this live. If you watch it after the fact, post your comments and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you.